My parents chose my sister's college fund over my surgery, so I took out a loan, paid them back in silence, and blocked them out of my life. I'm a 22-year-old guy, and growing up, I was always the shadow in my family. My sister, the golden child, had everything. She was smart, outgoing, and effortlessly earned my parents' praise. I didn't mind too much, though. I always thought my family had my back when I needed them. But that belief shattered when I found out I needed surgery for a health issue. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was necessary. The kind of thing that could improve my quality of life. I figured I'd talk to my parents, explain the situation, and they'd help me out, just like they always helped my sister with her school trips, her fancy clothes, her college fund. But when I brought it up, I was met with a look of hesitation. A sort of unspoken question hovered in the air. Are you worth it? I still remember the silence that followed. My dad shifted in his chair, avoiding eye contact, and my mom just stared at me like she was trying to process whether this was a big deal or not. Then they dropped it. My mom said they didn't have enough funds for my surgery, and that the money they had saved up for emergencies was already earmarked for my sister's college tuition. I could barely breathe. Was this really happening? Here I was, needing help, something as basic as medical treatment, and they were telling me no. They were telling me no because her college fund was more important. And just like that, my world tilted. I felt the walls close in around me. I wasn't just the lesser child in their eyes anymore. I wasn't even a priority. My sister didn't even know what was happening. She was so wrapped up in her plans, her future. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. It was too much. And that's when I realized I wasn't even seen anymore. Not the way she was. Not the way I thought I was. I couldn't let this go. I just couldn't. It wasn't just about the surgery anymore. It was about everything. Everything I had been taught to believe about family, about loyalty, about love, came crashing down that day. I went back to my room, my head spinning, feeling like I was suffocating. How could they prioritize her over me? I didn't get it. I needed that surgery. But apparently, her future mattered more than my health. The worst part? They didn't even seem sorry. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, to pretend like everything was fine. But I couldn't. I'd see my parents chatting excitedly about her upcoming college orientation, planning the big move, and there I was, just existing in the background, as invisible as I'd ever been. I began to wonder if I'd ever really mattered to them, or if I was just a placeholder until the real child came along. When I tried to talk to them again, they brushed me off. We'll help you when we can, but right now, your sister needs this more. That's when it hit me. I wasn't even worthy of their help, not like her. She deserved everything. She always did. It didn't even matter that I was falling apart inside, that I had to keep pretending to be okay while they made plans for her bright future. I was just the afterthought, the one who would always have to wait. And that's when I started feeling something I never thought I'd feel. Resentment. It wasn't just that they couldn't help me. It was the fact that they didn't want to. I wasn't going to be their last choice anymore. I wasn't going to wait around for their leftovers. So I made a decision, right then and there, I would do this on my own. But I had no idea what that decision would cost me. I kept trying to keep it together. I convinced myself that maybe I was just overreacting. That maybe, just maybe, once my sister had what she needed, they'd help me. But that hope started to fade the moment my parents invited me into the living room for a family discussion a few days later. They sat me down, and I already knew. I could feel the weight of it in the air. My sister, sitting there with a smile on her face, clueless about the storm brewing in the room. My parents started talking about the next steps for her, how they had secured a loan for her college expenses. Everything was set for her. Her future was lined up like some perfect, beautiful path. And then my mom turned to me. "So, we were thinking," she started, her voice dripping with the usual calm and collected tone she always used when making me feel small. "Once your sister's tuition is covered, we can look into your surgery." My heart dropped. Did she just say that? Once your sister's tuition is covered? My mind went blank. I felt this hot wave of humiliation rise up in me, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't let it show. Not with my sister sitting there, looking like the world was handed to her on a silver platter while I was drowning in this emotional cesspool. "I just need a bit of time," my dad added, his voice tight. "We can't afford to do both right now, you know that." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break everything, but I didn't. I just sat there nodding like I understood. Because I did. I understood all too well. I wasn't worth it. I was just the backup. I wasn't the one they'd drop everything for. She was, and that was the moment. The moment I knew I wasn't just the forgotten child in their eyes anymore. I wasn't even a backup plan. I was nothing. I left the room, feeling a quiet rage build up in me. My chest was tight with anger and betrayal. This wasn't just about money. This was about how much they really cared, and I wasn't fool enough to ignore it any longer. No one had my back. Not even my parents. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to wait around for scraps. And I sure as hell wasn't going to be the forgotten child anymore. I just needed a way out. And then it hit me. I didn't have to ask them for help. I could do it on my own, but I wasn't ready for what that would mean. The next few days felt like walking through mud. Everything seemed heavier. My family was still celebrating my sister's college acceptance, making plans for a farewell party, and all I could think about was how I was supposed to survive in this house, suffocating under this invisible weight. I kept my distance, pretending I was fine, that I could handle it all. But inside, I was breaking down. I didn't want to cry in front of them. Hell, I didn't even want to admit to myself how much their indifference was hurting. But the weight of it started to consume me. The thought that my health, my future, was less important than her college degree made me feel worthless. Every time my mom texted me to remind me that my sister's college expenses were the priority, it was like a slap in the face. My dad, too, kept telling me not to worry, that things would work out eventually. Eventually? How much longer was I supposed to wait? How much longer could I pretend that this wasn't destroying me? I wasn't just in physical pain anymore. My heart ached. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to let them know how much I hated the way they were treating me. But I stayed silent, swallowing it all down. I tried to talk to my sister once. Just once. I thought maybe she'd understand. I thought she'd realize how unfair this all was. But when I opened up to her, she just looked at me, confused. "Don't be like that. You know how hard they're working for me," she said, brushing it off with a shrug. "I'll be gone soon. Things will be different." I wanted to shout at her, tell her it wasn't her fault, that she didn't even know what was going on beneath the surface. But I couldn't. I couldn't make her understand something that she'd never even bothered to notice. So I buried it. I buried it deep. But with every passing day, the anger grew, the resentment, and the feeling that no one in my life really cared about me. I started making plans in my head, plans to fix this on my own. I didn't need them. Not anymore. I would figure out how to pay for the surgery, how to get the help I needed, and I wouldn't ask them for a damn thing. They had their priorities. I'd find my own way, but that decision, that was the first step down a path that would cost me more than I ever expected. It was a Tuesday night when I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating a half-hearted dinner while my parents discussed my sister's latest scholarship offer. My mind was a whirlwind of frustration, but I forced myself to focus on my plate, the food barely making it past my throat. I couldn't ask them. I wouldn't. They had made it clear they weren't going to help, no matter how much I needed it. I was nothing but an afterthought to them, a second-class citizen in my own family. But I refused to let that be my reality anymore. So I did something I never thought I would. I started looking into personal loans. I was terrified. Terrified of being in debt, terrified of making things worse, but it felt like my only option. The surgery was critical. I couldn't wait around anymore, hoping they'd change their minds. They wouldn't. They had already made their decision. I spent hours online, looking at different loan options. The interest rates were sky high, and the repayments were going to be a struggle, but the idea of taking control of my situation, even if it meant taking on the financial burden, was somehow comforting. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of power. It wasn't much, but it was something. I was doing something for me. I didn't tell my parents. I couldn't. What would be the point? They wouldn't care. I'd only hear the same excuses, the same dismissive tone, and I couldn't handle that anymore. I applied for the loan that night, and a week later, the money was in my account. The relief was temporary, like a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I scheduled the surgery, making sure it was as soon as possible. I didn't want to wait any longer, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the surgery anymore. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need their approval or their help. I was going to make this happen on my own. The cost of this decision, though, wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It wasn't just the money I was about to pay off. It was the trust I was losing in the people who should have had my back all along. I thought I was ready, but I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The day of the surgery came faster than I expected. I woke up early, the weight of the decision pressing on my chest. The hospital felt cold and sterile, and all I could think about was how I'd gotten here, alone, doing something I shouldn't have had to do by myself. I was going through a routine procedure, something that could have been solved so easily if my parents had just stepped up, but here I was. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the little things. The way the nurses talked to me like I was just another patient. The sterile smell of the antiseptic that made everything feel distant, as if I was watching someone else go through this. The surgery was quick. They wheeled me into the operating room, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a recovery room, groggy and disoriented. It wasn't life-threatening, but it still left me feeling vulnerable, exposed. I tried to focus on the fact that this was it, the end of my suffering, the relief I'd been waiting for. But all I could feel was the emptiness. When I came to, the first thing I realized was that no one had come to check on me. My parents didn't call. My sister was too busy with her new life to notice that I had gone under the knife. I felt more invisible than I ever had before. They didn't care. It wasn't just about the surgery anymore. It wasn't even about the money I'd spent or the debt I'd accumulated. It was about how they never even bothered to ask how I was feeling. I lay there in that sterile room, alone in my thoughts, and realized something I'd been avoiding. I was alone. No one was coming. No one was going to make it better. This was my reality now. I spent the next few days recovering, keeping to myself. I didn't want anyone there anyway. The silence of my recovery was somehow more comforting than the idea of pretending everything was okay with my family. The worst part wasn't the surgery itself. It wasn't even the pain or the discomfort of recovery. The worst part was knowing that I had gone through all of this without anyone in my corner, and when I got out of the hospital, still healing, I started to realize I had a new goal now. I wasn't just going to recover physically. I was going to recover emotionally too, but I had no idea how far I'd have to go to do that. The days after the surgery blurred together. I wasn't in severe pain, but I wasn't really okay either. I had a long recovery ahead of me, and the emotional toll of everything was just as exhausting as the surgery itself. I tried to focus on getting better, but the debt I had taken on loomed over me like a storm cloud. Every payment I made on that loan felt like a reminder of what had happened. I kept it all hidden. My parents had no idea I'd taken out a loan. They were too busy with their own lives, and the last thing I wanted was for them to feel any guilt over something they wouldn't even acknowledge. So I paid the monthly installments in silence. I remember the first time I made a payment. The notification popped up on my phone and I just stared at it. It felt surreal, like I was drowning in something I'd created. But I had no choice. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sister. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the feeling that I had to keep everything to myself. I didn't want them to know I was struggling. It wasn't just the physical pain from the surgery that hurt. It was the realization that I was alone in all of this. The fact that I had to make this decision without their support, without them even asking if I was okay, was a wound that wouldn't heal anytime soon. My sister was still living in her bubble of excitement about college, and my parents were wrapped up in everything they had planned for her. I didn't exist for them anymore. Not in a way that mattered. I couldn't be angry at my sister. She was just living her life. But the thought of them always rallying around her, while I was left to pick up the pieces, twisted something deep inside me. I paid off the loan little by little, each payment a reminder of how I had to go it alone. But as much as I hated the debt, I hated the idea of asking for their help even more. That was the cost of doing it myself. Loneliness. I was learning how to deal with that weight, even if it meant carrying it in silence. But there was something about paying off that loan, something about taking control of the situation that started to feel empowering. For the first time in a long while, I was doing something for me, even if it meant doing it in the shadows. And then, of course, my parents came to me with the usual questions like nothing had ever happened. The way they were talking about future plans for my sister, the way they casually asked how I was doing, none of it had changed. I couldn't believe how easily they slipped back into their role, acting like they didn't owe me an apology, like I didn't just go through the hardest experience of my life alone. It was clear. They had moved on. But I hadn't, and that would be the hardest part to face. The tension between my family and me had been building up for months, but I kept it all bottled inside. I kept pretending like everything was fine, but it wasn't. Not anymore. The resentment had festered too long, and I was starting to crack. The moment I had been avoiding finally arrived when I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront them. It happened one Sunday afternoon. My parents were sitting in the living room chatting about my sister's upcoming move to college. There was a sense of happiness in the air, like everything was perfect. It made me sick. I had tried to be patient, tried to let it go, but the injustice of it all weighed too heavily on me now. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my thoughts before I walked in. The tension in the room hit me instantly, but I didn't back down. "You guys never even asked me how I was after the surgery," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. They froze. My dad, who was always the first to brush things off, put down his newspaper. My mom's smile faded slightly. I could feel them trying to figure out if I was serious. "What do you mean?" my mom asked, her voice faltering. "We've been worried about you, haven't we?" My hands clenched into fists and the anger burned through me like fire. "Worried about me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were too busy planning everything for her to even care that I was going through a surgery. A surgery I had to pay for on my own." They went quiet, not understanding. My mom opened her mouth like she was about to speak, but the words didn't come. I could see the defensiveness in their eyes, but I didn't care. "I'm not asking for your pity," I spat. "I don't need your help anymore. I figured it out. But don't you dare act like you care now. You never did." My dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's not like that," he tried to explain, but I wasn't listening anymore. "You know what?" I snapped. "Maybe it is like that. Maybe I'm just not good enough for you. Maybe I never was." There it was, the truth I had been denying. I wasn't good enough for them, not in their eyes. They never saw me as worthy as my sister. I turned on my heel, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their apologies that meant nothing. I didn't need them to feel sorry for me. I needed them to understand the damage they had done, but that wasn't going to happen. As I walked out of the room, I heard my mom call after me. "We didn't mean to hurt you, But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I needed to be away from them, away from this family that had built its foundation on favoritism and neglect. I slammed the door behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control again, but I didn't know how far this would all go, how much more I could take. It was a few days after the confrontation with my parents when I got a text from my sister. I wasn't expecting it. She rarely reached out unless it was important. "We need to talk," the message read. I hesitated but called her back. The moment she picked up, her voice hit me hard. "Why didn't you tell me about the surgery?" she asked, her tone harsh, accusing. I paused, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" "It wasn't like I was keeping it from you," she went on. "I knew about it. I knew you were going through all of that and you didn't even tell me. You just shut me out." My stomach dropped. She knew. "You knew and didn't say anything?" Her voice was defensive. "I didn't want to make things worse. You know how Mom and Dad are. I thought if I stayed quiet, everything would calm down. I didn't think it was my place to get involved. I couldn't believe it." "So you let me go through that alone?" I asked, feeling betrayed. "You knew everything and did nothing?" "I thought you were handling it," she replied coldly. "You always do." Her words stung more than I expected. She had seen me suffer and chose to stay silent. She wasn't the innocent bystander I thought she was. She had been complicit in the family's neglect of me. I couldn't stand hearing any more. My trust in her shattered. "I'm done," I said, cutting the conversation short. I hung up, heart racing. For the first time, I realized that it wasn't just my parents who had failed me. It was her, too. The betrayal hurt deeper than anything they had done. I hit my breaking point one night, sitting alone in my apartment. The weight of everything I had been through, the surgery, the loan, the confrontation with my parents and sister, had finally crushed me. The bills were stacked in front of me, reminders of the debt I had taken on to get my health back, and I had finally paid it off. But as I stared at those papers, something inside me felt emptier than ever. I had done everything I could to fit into this family to make them proud. I sacrificed so much, my own needs, my own well-being, just to feel like I mattered to them. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. I had fought for years to be seen, to be acknowledged. But the reality was that my family had never truly cared about me in the way I needed. They had always put my sister first, always made me second in line. That night I realized something that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was done. I couldn't keep fighting for their approval. They would never see me as equal. They would never care the way I needed them to. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, and all it had done was make me feel more invisible. I could keep fighting for a place in their lives, keep trying to get them to understand, but I realized that I didn't need them. I had survived without them for so long, and I could keep going. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was time to let go. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had everything I needed to move forward, to rebuild my life on my own terms. And for the first time, I felt a small flicker of peace. The day I made the final payment on the loan, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't just the debt that was gone. It was the feeling of being trapped, of being tied down by my family's expectations and neglect. I had done it on my own, and I felt an overwhelming sense of quiet empowerment. But it wasn't just about the loan. It was about everything. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't owe them any explanations. My parents, my sister, they hadn't cared enough to notice what I was going through, and I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of understanding my journey. So, without any fanfare, I blocked them all. Every number, every account. It was a quiet decision, but one that felt like a thunderous roar of freedom. It wasn't an angry confrontation or a dramatic fight. I didn't yell, I didn't throw things, I didn't even confront them. I simply left. I didn't need to make a scene. They had already made their choices, and I had made mine. My peace wasn't going to come from their validation or approval. It had to come from me, and the only way to do that was to walk away. The silence that followed was deafening. For days I waited for a text, a call, anything. They tried to reach out, of course, sending messages like nothing had changed, asking how I was, trying to act like they hadn't just discarded me for years. But I ignored them, every single one of their attempts, and with each ignored message the weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. I didn't feel guilty or angry. I felt free. Free from the expectations. Free from the hurt. Free from them. I was finally living for myself, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. Months passed, and with each day I began to rebuild my life. The emptiness I had once felt started to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. I focused on my health, my career, and most importantly, my personal growth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. I was living for me. I found strength in the things that mattered to me. I started exercising more, paying attention to my body, my mind, my needs. I poured energy into my work, finding fulfillment in things I had neglected while trying to fit into a family that didn't see my worth. Slowly, but surely, I found joy again, something I hadn't felt in years. Cutting them out of my life wasn't just a decision. It was liberation. It was the moment I realized that I had spent so many years fighting for a place in their world, trying to prove myself to people who would never see me as equal. I realized I didn't need them. The love, the support I had been craving from them, I could give that to myself. I could love myself more than they ever had. I'm no longer dependent on their approval or their love. I've found my own way. I've built my own life, and it's one that is defined by my own choices, not by anyone else's expectations, and the final realization came like a wave crashing over me. I'm worth more than the way they treated me. I've always been enough, and I don't need their validation to prove it. I'm better off without them, and I finally have the peace I've been searching for. For the first time in my life, I can truly say I'm happy. I'm living for myself, and that is all I will ever need.